You can have your
Main event of the evening.
ready to race to you.
These days are
Hello and welcome to These Days Are Ours, a Happy Days podcast. I'm Peter.
And I'm Joe.
And today we are discussing Season 7, Episode 9, Joanie Busts Out. A title that I think both of us feel uncomfortable just saying, or even hearing.
What? I'm not going to say that.
Okay, Peter, tell us what happens at Joanie something.
We open at a photography studio where Chachi is working. A model named Michelle is preparing for a nude shot in a bathtub. Fonzie steps in from the waiting room, where he was making out with a girl, and he and Chachi talk.
You getting here on time?
Oh, early, Fonzie. You kidding? Early. I race here after school.
Chachi asks Jake the photographer if Fonzie can stay and watch, and Jake says he can. The shoot continues on as planned, until Michelle drops her bathrobe, and Fonzie, scandalized on Chachi's behalf, covers his 17-year-old cousin's eyes and drags him away to talk.
That girl happens to be naked.
Well, how do you take a bath?
Without cameras, usually.
He tells Jake that Chachi quits and drags him out. Back at the Cunningham house, Joanie is arguing with Howard and Marion because they won't let her take a 2-day trip to Chicago with her friend Sally to see Fabian. Two 17-year-old girls alone in a hotel with crazy conventioners? Absolutely not.
You told me you go to museums.
I do, but the others don't.
Marion asks Richie for his advice. Richie goes back and forth for about a minute, and ultimately is not helpful.
Well, it's not an easy situation. On the one hand, Joanie deserves to be treated like an adult, but on the other hand, two young girls alone in Chicago might be kind of dangerous.
Joanie snaps that she doesn't care what anyone says. She's going to start living her own life, even if she has to get out of there to do it. She storms upstairs. Howard worries that they failed with Joanie, but Marion insists everything will work out fine. They leave for the butcher, who apparently has a thing for Marion.
This is the butcher that keeps winking at me.
Fonzie drags Chachi in and calls Richie down to talk to Chachi about quitting his job as an assistant to a photographer taking nudes. Richie says Fonzie's overreacting, and Chachi insists Jake runs a classy operation, with brochures and everything. He shows said brochure to Richie, who once again begins going back and forth.
It's not an easy situation. A lot of people think of nude photography as an art form, you know? Well, on the other hand,
Prompting Fonzie and Chachi to leave, forgetting the brochure on the coffee table. Later, Sally is talking to Joanie in the living room about neither of their parents letting them go to the concert.
I am so tired of doing everything they tell me to do. I know.
They find the brochure on the table, and they begin talking about how glamorous the models are. This gives Joanie an idea. Why not take the chance to make money and travel the world as a model? The next day at the studio, Chachi quits his job with Jake, and recommends his friend Ralph Mal to replace him. As Chachi is about to leave, in comes Joanie, and Chachi is, naturally, horrified.
Hey, Joanie. Joanie!
Joanie tells him not to tell anyone she's here, and goes when Jake calls for the next model. At Arnold's, Chachi tries to ask Fonzie for advice, explaining that someone they know is modeling for Jake. Fonzie says it's none of their business, until Chachi says it's Joanie. Fonzie is furious and goes into his office to tell Richie. 5 seconds later, Richie runs out of the office in Arnold's, screaming bloody murder. Back at the studio, Jake tells Joanie she's terrific and to go get undressed for some test shots.
I guess I look pretty silly next to all these gorgeous women.
Nonsense. It's just a different look. More, girl next door.
Joanie is shocked. The brochure didn't mention that this would be nude photography, but pretends to be fine with it for a few minutes before she changes her mind and says she doesn't want to. And anyway, she has to go home and wash her cat. She leaves in such a rush that she forgets her sweater there. Richie and Fonzie arrive and see Joanie's sweater on top of the screen and someone behind it. Not Joanie, as Richie quickly discovers.
all right, now just what do you think you... Holy moly.
After Richie and Fonzie ogle the model for a while, they leave. Joanie is home when Richie and Fonzie show up there, and the two guys discuss what to do. Fonzie plans to go to his room and remember when Joanie was a sweet little girl.
I'm going to imagine Joanie in her little chipmunk uniform.
He might not even be able to go out tonight. Richie strikes up a conversation with Joanie, then demands to know why he found Joanie's sweater at the studio.
I thought it would be fun.
Fun? Fun is for people with their clothes on.
Joanie says she didn't know the photos were nude, and she left as soon as she found out. She figures out Chachi snitched, and Richie says if she should be upset at anyone, be upset at him for thinking that Joanie would ever do anything like that. Howard and Marion, back from the butcher, listen in on Joanie and Richie as Joanie explains why she changed her mind.
What are you gonna do, eavesdrop on your own kids?
Of course. How else do you think I find things out?
Joanie heard Howard's voice in her head telling her to remember right and wrong. As Richie and Joanie go to talk to Fonzie, Howard and Marion pretend to have just arrived home.
That was close.
Oh, now you see that, Howard? We didn't fail Joanie. Isn't that nice?
At Arnold's, Joanie confronts Chachi, who says the only reason he opened his mouth was because he cared about her.
Oh, thanks, Chachi. Just don't let it happen again.
Meanwhile, Richie asks Ralph about his new job. Ralph was almost immediately fired for kissing the negatives.
I was only cleaning the negatives. With your mouth?
Thank you, Peter. That was Joanie Something Something. It first aired back on November 13th, 1979. Happy Days was followed that night by a new Angie, in which Danny DeVito guest stars as Angie's obnoxious Uncle Cheech.
Hey, Cheech, man!
Oh my God!
NBC had a new episode of The Misadventures of Sheriff Lobo called Run for the Money Part 3. This was the conclusion of a 3-part story that started on BJ and the Bear. It was about Lobo and a number of other characters trying to catch the criminal who robbed a casino. And CBS had a new episode of California Fever called Stars of Tomorrow, in which Vince, Ross, and Lori are promised an important date for their band, but find they have been tricked.
I moved to Hollywood when I was 14 and got tricked.
So, Peter, of those choices,
I think Danny DeVito would probably be great for livening up the rather dull Angie.
I think that was the reasoning behind it. Joanie Something Something was directed by Jerry Paris, and it was written by Beverly Bloomberg. The most recent of Beverly's episodes that we covered was Christmas Time. As for guest stars this week, let's start with G.W. Bailey as Jake Whitman. George William Bailey is a very prolific, gravelly-voiced character actor from Port Arthur, Texas, who has done plenty of comedy and drama in a career that has lasted over 45 years. TV viewers may know him best as Sergeant Luther Rizzo on MASH.
What do you want, Rizzo, in 3 syllables or less?
I don't want nothing, sir. Just thought I'd say hello.
He also had recurring roles on St. Elsewhere, Goodnight Beantown, The Jeff Foxworthy Show, The Closer, and Major Crimes, plus the miniseries War and Remembrance. He guest starred on Laverne and Shirley, Starsky and Hutch, Soap, Charlie's Angels, Chips, and Dinosaurs. On the big screen, G.W. Bailey played the recurring role of Lieutenant Harris in the Police Academy movies.
All right, you scumballs, you have 30 minutes to share and get the plan. Let's go, move it, move it, move it.
As well as Felix in Mannequin and Scroter in Short Circuit. So, Peter, what did you think of G.W. Bailey's acting performance as Jake Whitman?
Well, he's believably kind of sleazy, but he doesn't overdo it. I don't believe that Chachi is entirely accurate when he says that Jake's operation is classy, but it does seem to hold true to basic professionalism. On the other hand, Jake hired a 17-year-old to be his assistant, and he also was about to let Joanie take nude photographs. Apparently, he didn't check with her to ask how old she was. It's not that professional an operation. I think he's just kind of a weirdly written, slightly confused character. But G.W. Bailey, he's fine as the character. He's not too sleazy. He's not outright loathsome. He's just a guy doing a job, but he could be doing a better job.
I was surprised that Jake Whitman wasn't written as more of a stereotypical sleazeball. I expected somebody with a comb over and a really loud plaid sports jacket, something like that. Jake Whitman doesn't seem to be that kind of guy at all. He doesn't check IDs for his models or his employees, and he does seem to somewhat allow an atmosphere of sexual harassment in the studio.
He did fire Ralph for making out with the negatives, but on the other hand, he doesn't seem to do anything about Chachi sexually harassing the models.
He does not sexually harass the models at all. Jake doesn't seem to have any sex drive whatsoever.
Chachi,
Yes.
you've got to learn not to get so excited when we do nude shots.
He is completely detached from this. The best thing I can say about Jake is that he never pressures anybody to do anything that they don't want to. He seems to be very comfortable with people coming and going from his studio as they please.
When Joanie says she has to go and wash her cat, he doesn't try to make her stay or anything. I guess because he didn't pay her yet.
If they want to be models, that's fine. If they don't want to be models, that's fine as well. I think G.W. Bailey escapes from this episode with at least some of his dignity intact. We also have Tammy Taylor as Joanie's best friend, Sally. Tammy is an actress from L.A. who was near the beginning of her career when she did this episode. She's mostly known for her work on soap operas like The Young and the Restless, Days of Our Lives, and Rituals. She also appeared on California Fever, Chips, 8 is Enough, Give Me a Break, Whiz Kids, Mr. Belvedere, and the web series Just Us Guys. Her movies include Meatballs 2 and the utterly insane Malibu High.
This is the story of a schoolgirl named Kim, who was the best in her class. Malibu High.
What did you think of Tammy Taylor as Sally?
Unfortunately, I can't help but compare her in my head to Jenny Piccolo, who has not yet appeared in person on the show. Sally seems like a much more down-to-earth character. Unlike Joanie, her initial thought is to say, well, if both of our parents won't let us go to Chicago, that's fine. She mostly seems to just be there to be someone that Joanie can bounce off of for a little while who is a peer and not her parents. And yeah, she does a good job at projecting down-to-earthness, but also adolescent boy craziness.
It's an adequate performance. Like you, I was immediately reminded of Jenny Piccolo. Sally is sort of a prototypical, less fun Jenny Piccolo. On the one hand, it's nice to let Joanie have somebody to bounce off of and exchange dialogue with. On the other hand, Jenny Piccolo is a much more fun and funny character. Sally is no Jenny Piccolo, but she's okay. We also have Rhonda Shear as Michelle, the bathtub model at the beginning.
You seem kind of young. I hope I don't embarrass you.
You go right ahead.
Rhonda is a model, comedian, actress, and entrepreneur from New Orleans who may be best known as the host of the late-night movie program USA Up All Night in the 1990s.
Next on USA Up All Night.
With a career like Rhonda's, it's difficult to know where to begin. Do you talk about her being Miss Louisiana in 1975 or posing for Playboy twice in the 90s? Do you mention her infomercial appearances or the fact that she now markets her own line of women's underwear? Do you talk about the fact that she's been a touring comedian for years? Or maybe you just stick to her TV and movie appearances. On the small screen, Rhonda appeared on Sheriff Lobo, Chips, Heart to Heart, The Fall Guy, The A-Team, Three's Company, The Dukes of Hazzard, Cheers, Dallas, and Married with Children. Her movies include Spaceballs, Galaxina, Basic Training, and Assault of the Party Nerds 2.
Assault of the Party Nerds 2, The Heavy Petting Detective, starring Richard Gabby, Rhonda Up All Night Shear, Bert the Boy Wonder Ward.
Peter, did Rhonda Shear as Michelle make any kind of impression on you?
Not really, no. I do like knowing that she was also a late-night movie host, much like last episode's guest star Cassandra Peterson, aka Elvira. I'm hoping this will be a recurring theme for Happy Days from now on. Guest stars and bit parts who went on to become late-night movie hosts.
Like Cassandra Peterson, Rhonda Shear has a real cult following. People who know who she is are very excited to see her, and they would probably be excited to know that she's in an episode of Happy Days. Her role in this is kind of brief and lame, but Rhonda Shear is on Happy Days, so if you wanted to see her, there she is. And last but not least, we have Tafa O'Connell as Carol, the model who talks to Richie for a while. Tafa is an actress from Providence, Rhode Island, who's been working in TV and film since the mid-70s. She was a regular on Blansky's Beauties as Hillary S. Prentice. She also guested on Laverne and Shirley, and she'll be back on Happy Days later this season. Her other TV credits include Vegas, Wonder Woman, Chips, Beretta, The Incredible Hulk, Archie Bunker's Place, Dallas, and more. Her movies include Rocky II, Galaxy of Terror, New Year's Evil, Hot Chili, Dismembered, and The Change-Up with Ryan Reynolds. I wanted to point out that all four of our guest stars this week had been on Chips.
Chips was very big in the 80s, and we're just about to hit the 80s.
We were indeed. Did Tafa O'Connell make any impression on you at all?
Her role doesn't really have a lot of dignity to it. Richie initially thinks that she's his sister, and then he sees her naked and realizes that she is not his sister, and then he and Fonzie ogle her for a while, and it's honestly kind of uncomfortable. She doesn't have a lot to do, and what she does have to do isn't great, but that's not her fault. She didn't write this.
She's okay. It's mostly a voice role. She's mostly behind a screen talking. She's fine. As for songs this week, we hear Run Around Sue by Dion. This was a #1 hit in 1960. Dion recorded it after he split from his group, the Belmonts. And at the end of the episode, we hear I'm Sorry by Brenda Lee. This hit #1 in the summer of 1960 when Brenda was only 15 years old. As for cultural and historical references, some context is needed for this episode. November 1979 was a sweeps period for the television industry.
Sweep?
This is a time when television ratings are measured, which affects advertising rates, so networks knock themselves out to grab as many viewers as possible. Sheriff Lobo was giving Happy Days some serious competition at the time, so Happy Days responded with more salacious episodes like Burlesque and Joanie Busts Out so that ABC could do spicier promos.
Oh, God.
Tuesday on Happy Days.
We need girls. We need lots of girls.
The burlesque show must go on.
Nobody could get that many girls.
And Fonzie gets them and gets into the act himself.
It was controversial at the time. They did take some heat for it from the press. That's why they did these 2 episodes back to back. We can blame all of this on Sheriff Lobo.
Thanks a lot, Sheriff Lobo. Thanks a lot.
Joanie wants to go to a Fabian concert in Chicago. Fabian Forte was a teen idol of the late 50s and early 60s, known for hits like Turn Me Loose, Tiger, and Hound Dog Man.
Hound Dog Man, I want to be a Hound Dog Man.
A minor subplot in this episode involves Howard and Marion trying to win the Irish sweepstakes.
You always say we're going to win the Irish sweepstakes.
Well, somebody somebody has to win. Why not us?
This was an annual lottery held in Ireland from 1930 to 1987, with the proceeds going to hospitals. In the early years, the Irish sweepstakes attracted numerous participants from America, since lotteries were generally illegal over here. After lotteries became common in America in the 1950s, the Irish sweepstakes declined in popularity. Had you ever heard of the Irish sweepstakes?
I'm pretty sure I had. As a kid, I watched MeTV a lot, so I watched a lot of old sitcoms, and I know I've heard the words Irish sweepstakes before. I don't remember on what show.
I'm gonna win the Irish sweepstakes.
I want to say Bewitched.
Fonzie compares Richie to Mickey Spillane.
Richie's a writer. They got insights into legs like Mickey Spillane.
Mickey was the prolific author of crime novels from the 1940s to the early 2000s. He's most famous for creating the fictional detective Mike Hammer. Spillane's novels were well known for their depictions of sex and violence. His book, I, the Jury, was referenced in the early seasons of Happy Days. It was nice to hear a few words about Mickey Spillane again. Do you remember when they were always talking about I, the Jury?
I do. All the way back to the very first episode.
Sally says, I thought they outlawed slavery in this country. It's weird to think that at the time of this story, which takes place in the early 1960s, the 13th Amendment was less than 100 years old. It was finally ratified by the states on December 6, 1865, half a year after the death of Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah, real weird for a pair of white girls to be talking about slavery, but it was a different time, I guess.
For the second time in Happy Days history, Ralph says, wiki wacky woo.
Wiki wacky woo.
They must be trying to turn that into his new catchphrase. This term originated in a song called On the Isle of Wiki Wacky Woo, written in 1923 by Walter Donaldson and Gus Kahn.
On the Isle of Wiki Wacky Woo, tricky, chicky, kitty, catchy you.
Is Wiki Wacky Woo working for you as a catchphrase?
Well, it's kind of obnoxious, so it fits Ralph's personality.
And Ralph calls himself Peter Pan.
I'm Peter Pan, I'm flying!
Peter is a character created by Scottish novelist and playwright J.M. Barrie. The character, a mischievous boy who can fly, never ages, and lives on an island called Neverland.
Hey, you want to play with me? Come on, let's climb the tree. Come on, climb the tree, climb the tree.
Debuted in a 1904 play that was adapted as a novel in 1911. Do you think Peter Pan is still viable as a commercial property anymore? Are we done with Peter Pan?
I don't necessarily think so. I think Peter Pan could still work. I think the basic premise has a lot of resonance in how we think about childhood and how we think about adulthood, but also there's a lot of racism in the book, so you really have to reckon with that.
Other observations this week. I know that Paramount reuses props from old episodes. In fact, I spotted the world's ugliest tablecloth on both Happy Days and Laverne and Shirley. While watching this story, I started wondering if the filing cabinets and the water cooler from Jake's studio were recycled from previous episodes or from other Paramount shows. Jake also has a stuffed panda bear that I'm pretty sure used to be in Joanie's room.
That makes me a sad panda.
I was just trying to focus on anything else on the screen. Look at that water cooler in the background. It's like sort of wedge-shaped, so it fits exactly in a corner. I thought that was kind of neat. And this is the episode that debuts Aaron Moran's very 1970s permed hairdo.
Here's a permanent that's fast and lasts. It's a new Tony, a self-timing Tony with 15-minute waving lotion.
I guess that makes it a landmark in the history of the series. Is this the point from which she has the permed hair from now on?
I believe so. Chachi compares her to a poodle, but honestly, to me, she looks more like Adrienne Barbeau. It's a very not 60s hairstyle. We're getting closer to the point where Happy Days just kind of gives up on the nostalgia angle and just becomes a weird aesthetic mishmash of the 60s and the 80s.
Well, it started really when they stopped even trying to give Scott Baio a 50s or 60s hairstyle. For one episode, they tried to give him like a pompadour. They tried to like grease his hair back and make him look more like Fonzie.
Yeah. They're also trying to sell Scott Baio as a teen idol. That's why they want to stick to stuff that a hypothetical teen girl audience would be attracted to. And I guess teen girls of the late 70s and early 80s wouldn't think pompadours are attractive.
Yeah, you got to put Scott Baio on the cover of Tiger Beat and 16, and he's got to look right for that. So, Peter, were there any outstanding Happy Days fashions this week?
The outfit that Joanie wears to the modeling agency is this very nice frilly shirt and a very professional looking skirt, which would be more aesthetically pleasing if it wasn't a very obvious case of she's trying to look older so that they will not clock her as 17.
In fact, I thought this episode was a missed opportunity fashion-wise with the character of Jake Whitman. Again, I would have given him gold chains and like a flare. and like a butterfly collar on his shirt. And
a very obvious toupee.
Yes, and a plaid sports jacket and white leather shoes.
And a big cigar.
Exactly. You see, you're getting it. Let's at least have some fun with this. So, Peter, did you have any other observations that you wanted to make about Joanie something?
There's a little joke about Marion not wanting to go alone to the butcher's because apparently he's got a thing for her and he likes to wink at her. And that's why she wants Howard there with her, so the butcher won't try anything. Maybe it's just because the basic plot of this episode is kind of icky, but in conjunction with that joke did not really land.
It's less a joke and more of a sobering reminder of another era in American history.
If this basic plot line was not being done in a sitcom, I think it could have been a more interesting exploration of certain themes, but as it is, it's just kind of uncomfortable.
So, Peter, I will ask that age-old timeless question. Was this episode any good?
It was not as bad as I expected it to be watching it this time around, but it was kind of uncomfortable to watch. It doesn't sexualize Joanie as much as I was afraid it would. It's still kind of awkward to watch, and it's not great. I did like the talk between Joanie and Richie at the end. I like it when they're siblings who get along. That was nice.
The best thing I can say about this episode is that given the sleazy subject matter and the reason why they did this episode, it's pretty mild and genteel stuff. It could have been way, way worse. The thing is, this is an 8 o'clock show. This is a show for kids. I don't think this is the kind of story that they necessarily need to be doing.
Yeah, and like you said, they're doing this because it's sweeps week and they're trying to appeal to perverts.
They did this episode for salacious reasons. They tried to lure some viewers away from Sheriff Lobo with a promise of sex, and they wound up with a fairly bland and mild episode. It's just one that you can skip, unless you are a G.W. Bailey completist. I thought it was kind of interesting to go back to the newspapers from 1979 and find out why they were doing this episode. They were chastised for it a bit in the press. I don't know that they ever went back to this kind of episode. They do slightly more suggestive episodes every once in a while, but it doesn't become their modus operandi. It doesn't become their bread and butter. They don't become a jiggle show.
They do not. That was what Lansky's Beauties was for.
Yes, we have one of Lansky's Beauties in this episode. So, Peter, how can people keep up with us and find out about all the wonderful things that we are doing?
Listeners can follow us on Twitter at Fonzie Podcast. They can follow me on Twitter at Peter Volfranc. That's PeterVulfranc.
And they can follow me on Twitter at Joe_A_Blevins. They can find this podcast online at thesedaysaroours.libsyn.com. And they can email us with questions, comments, and concerns at thesedaysaroourspodcast@gmail.com. So, Peter, what do we have on the docket for next week?
Next week, Richie gets drugged at a party and makes a fool of himself in King Richard's Big Night.
That sounds like a memorable episode. So, see you later, alligator.
In a while, crocodile.
Smut. Give me smut and nothing but a dirty novel I can't shut if it's uncut and unsut. Tull. I've never quibbled. If it was ribbled, I would devour where others merely nibbled. As the judge remarked the day that he acquitted my Aunt Hortense, to be smut it must be utterly without redeeming social importance. Poor the graphic pictures I adore, indecent magazines galore, I like them more if they're hardcore. Bring on the obscene movies, murals, postcards, neckties, samplers, stained glass windows, tattoos, anything. More, I'm still not satisfied.